something very different now. And I'm going to invite onto the stage Daniel Dallum, Head of Sustainability Consulting at KPMG in Sweden. I'm not going to attempt to explain the model. That's Daniel's job. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And actually, my time is already out, it says here, but I guess I have some few minutes. Right? Thank you so much for having me. I guess having KPMG here is maybe a bit different. And to be honest, this kind of audience is also not the normal audience that I speak for. But as Barry said, I'm head of sustainability consulting at KPMG, and there you, of course, come in very much into the stakeholder side, and how can we evaluate that. You've seen the headlines, and of course there will be impact on your brand, but it will also be very concrete changes to your business environment. You will have new regulations. You will have things really affecting the business, and you all know this. But what we did in 2010, we looked at what would happen if the externalities, the things that the companies today influence or have an effect on, like the environment, like social factors, what would happen if these actually were internalized, if they were actually put on the companies, if we had to pay the price for these externalities, the things that we don't pay for today, but we affect the society. So what we did is that we looked at 800 companies, 11 sectors. We looked at not only the environmental aspect, we looked at 22 different aspects of it, and we say, what would happen if we put these costs on the companies? Well, actually, 40% of the results would actually disappear. So by having these costs put on the companies, their results would be very much, and you can see some industries very much affected on this. So why is that? Well, we have a number of factors that are already being internalized. We see a lot of environmental factors, like CO2. We have water in some extent, putting on the companies. So it's not just that they have an external effect, but it will affect the companies. And you have a lot of these factors, and some of them has not gone all the way into the companies yet. We have a sense of what is the sort of the human rights issues. And we have it saying sort of, okay, we know what we can expect from the companies or organizations, but we haven't really put the costs on them yet. We might, in a sense of sort of public opinion and how we treat their brand, but there is not a cost really on it yet. And you see a number of others. The tax issue is not just here in Sweden, on many places where we put more and more pressure on the companies. And there will be new issues coming all the way. So why is this? Well, in 2010, we looked at, okay, what are the mega forces affecting the global companies or any company? That could be the climate change, population growth, all these big mega trends. And so then why are they affecting the companies? Well, of course, there's the shift in the market dynamics. We have scarcity materials, but we also have workers demanding better pay. We have the regulations. We have, of course, the new laws, the new taxes. We have things that will directly influence the business model and the profits of the companies. But then we have the third one, the stakeholder action. And of course, the stakeholder action, as you know, will influence the other. So we get to hear very often that, okay, people are just talking about buying more organic food, or they want things more ethical. But when they come there, in the store, they will still buy what's cheapest, right? And that might be so, even though we see changes there as well. But they influence, as you know, other stakeholders, politicians, regulators, investors, whatever it could be. What we did recently, and I won't go into that, is actually quantified and had a way of visualizing the effect that this will have on the companies. So what we did is that we added not just the normal P&L, which would be the blue one, but then also added what are these other kind of factors, sort of that we have externalities, but what would happen if that was internalized, if that was put on the companies? Or just saying, okay, what is the societal value that the company creates or destroys? And then we can look at it in a different way. But that's not really why I'm here. That's a new report. It's open source. You can download it. Please do, if you want to look at that kind of measurements. So really, going into maybe why I'm here. We did a study together with a professor at the Stockholm School of Economics, where we wanted to look at how can we also foresee stakeholder reactions to different behaviors that the company does, or to the communication or mitigating actions that the company can do, able to sort of foresee what the broader stakeholder reactions would be, and in that also saying, okay, how would that affect the company going forward? The study that we did was 10,000 people in Sweden. What we're doing now is that we're applying this to a number of companies that using the tool to measure their sort of stakeholders, not just what they have done, but business decisions that they might do, and seeing, okay, how can we look at them? Okay, and now I realize this is probably an audience where you know all this already. Of course, any company behavior will influence the primary stakeholders in any way. You have the mediating parties, of course, affecting this as well, going back and forth. But then you have the sort of the secondary stakeholders. And when it comes to the sustainability issues, that might be probably the most effect coming from secondary stakeholders. That would be the legislation, that would be investors and others influenced by consumers, voters, whatever it could be. And the professor then, of course, applied this and looked at this from a moral and ethical perspective, because we know that all the different stakeholders will be influenced by their personal views and their personal sort of moral and ethical standards. So that is part of the model. So then, going into the model itself, what we did was that we set up scenarios, different scenarios that the company will do or has done. And then we have actually 3 different reactions that we measure. So what is the sort of the opinion about the company behavior itself, the change in perception of the company now that we know this new scenario and new information, and how would that change our behavior? Sort of, will we buy more or less? Will we invest more or less in this company? Will we be more or less motivated if we're an employee? And it was an experimental setup, which means, of course, that the same people, the same group of people, will not look at the different scenarios. They will only look at one. So let me give you some results from the survey that we did. And there will be an index. It will be between -100 and +100. Of course, -100 meaning an extreme negative view on the company that will do this kind of action or unethical behavior. So actually, the one that was on top was child labor. Now we tested 13 different scenarios or actions. Of course, there will be many, many more that you could test, but we tested 13 actually here. So minus 70 would be an extremely negative reaction if it was found out that the company are using suppliers that have child labor. So it is one way, so not the company itself, but the supplier of this company. Extremely negative. And then we had a number of others. Maybe what is a little interesting, I think, is that, of course, child labor, we probably thought that would be very controversial. Human rights, corruption, other things. But then we actually had two in the middle there, data privacy and sales methods. Unethical sales method would be, let's say, you're selling things to elderly that doesn't really understand what they're buying. But sort of the reason behind that is these are things that are very close to yourself. Child labor, human rights violations, corruption is probably not part of your sort of daily life, at least not in Sweden. So, but then you have a few of these are very close to yourself and that you will feel a lot for. And let's just look at one of them, minimum wage. We have it here, and here is the same thing. And then we try to look at, okay, how can we communicate differently for this topic or issue, and will the stakeholders change their views on our company? Well, what we could do, or what the media probably would do, is that they will communicate, okay, this leads to problems like you have to have double jobs, you cannot supply food for your family, the negative stuff of having sort of low wages. And the company would try to say, well, because we're there, we're providing jobs. So it's much better that we are in this country doing these things than not being there. Okay, so we have some sort of understanding for that argument, but not much. Well, one other thing is saying, okay, we have the minimum wage that we have, but we are also sponsoring charity organizations in the country working for the poor, etc. Okay, so we are doing something, but not much. We're saying, okay, we have these low wages, but we will be very strict on the working conditions. Okay, a little bit better. But the interesting thing is, of course, if we say, no, we're going to have higher wages, we're going to build our own factories, so we can make sure that we could guarantee higher wages to our workers. That actually turns something very negative to something positive, understandably. But actually, there is one thing that is almost as positive, and that is saying, okay, now we're going to stand with our business model, but we're going to influence the country, the other actors within this sector, and we're going to try to raise the minimum wage for everybody in this country. So that means actually not just our workers, but all workers will have higher wages in this country. And it is, of course, much cheaper for the company. It doesn't change the business model. And I would think it is much better idea for the workers in this country. So actually trying to find what are the alternatives that will give us the positive reaction from our stakeholders, but still being part of sort of our core strategy. Okay, so what we also did, this is then based on actually 3 stakeholder groups. It's anyway, there's 3 stakeholder groups. The employees, it's shareholders, and its consumers, right? And so then we also asked top management, and what do you think consumers react, how would they react to these different scenarios? So we asked a number of senior board members, senior management, and see how would they react. And they didn't see the results, of course, beforehand. And the gray is how they reacted. And of course, if they didn't think that it was a problem to start with, and if it was a bit of a problem for the stakeholders, let's just communicate, and that's everything, that's fine. So, and if they're making decisions based on their own belief of how people will react, of course, things could be quite wrong. And let's see at some other examples. This is the data privacy. Here we also tested a number of different sort of actions that the company could do. And actually, we didn't find anything that would really change the way people react. So that means we really need to be careful of how you handle this issue to start with. Let's say the mobile operators, they have huge number of information on us. And they want to use this, of course, in some way. But they should be really careful, because there's no really way, at least not what we found, that they could mitigate the negative effects on that. Of course, you can segment this in any way. You see the negative, the elder might be more affected by information. But that could also be because they didn't have the information to start with, but the younger did. Because so they already had that as part of their decision on their opinion. And the interesting thing is, almost across all the issues that we tested, the elder are more negative. Which to start with I thought was probably wrong, because I would think it was the opposite. But it's not. And the professor explains this with being sort of, this is how you were brought up. This is sort of your core ethical and moral standards. Might have been stronger before, sort of going into these issues then. And one final almost, being a shareholder, you don't react as negative and you don't react as positive. Might be that, you're a shareholder because you're there for the, for the money, and doesn't look that much as you would if you were an employee on how the company acts. But this also tells that even companies that don't have a sort of consumer product really needs to think about how they act, because it will influence their employees and their sort of possibilities to hire in the future. One last thing. We have now just looked at the negative side, sort of the unethical side, but you can also turn that around and look at, okay, if you act very ethical, you will have almost just a mirroring of the negative side. So the issues that are very negative will also be very positive if you act more ethical than expected or your peers. Yeah, so what we try to do is try to get a tool that could actually be sort of robust and clear in making the decisions. That was it.
Thank you, Daniel. So very different. Anyone have a question? One here, please, lady here. Please pass it up.
We were talking earlier this morning about the
Michelle,
challenge.
please tell everyone who you are.
I'm sorry. I'm Michelle Murray. I work for National Cattlemen's Beef Association
Thank
in
you.
the U.S. So we were talking earlier today about the absence of bad news and how that's difficult to track. And I think it's interesting to look at it from more of a reputation management sort of ethical view and that correlation between actions the company takes versus what could be a negative. I was wondering if you've done any modeling just on the absence of news or going deeper on issues versus just the reputation.
Well, actually, we're not looking at the news, or we're not looking at what is published. What we're trying to do is actually put sort of scenarios that could have happened, but also things that could not have happened, but being a decision going forward. So we're trying to create sort of the news, if you say so, and see what the reactions to it is. So in that sense, we haven't looked into that, no.
Okay.
And then just to build on it, have you been able to test the model now that you've built it?
Yes, yes. Yes, we have, and we have clients using it for both sort of strategic decision making, what should we do and what should we don't do, but also, of course, for communication. How can we communicate in a way where we sort of engage our stakeholders?
Delegate at the back.
Hi, it's Adam from Salience, Karma. Yeah, I was following up from that last question, actually. I was wondering whether you tested those favourability ratings on actual media coverage against those issues that those companies get to see if there's any correlation that you could find between the two.
No, I know some of our clients do, but we haven't done that as part of the of this tool or methodology. But I know some of the clients have this as one part, and then they look at like media coverage and that as separate parts. Yeah.
We'll take one more question, please.
It's okay. Pawnee Joker, UK government. Alex mentioned when he was speaking earlier, one of the key pieces of work we've done in the UK is develop a UK trust reputation tracker. And the actual tracker itself, albeit worked with the Reputation Institute, identifies corporate social responsibility as a key dimension. Just following on from the point that was mentioned earlier and what was echoed this morning, particularly in relation to joining the dots, what would be interesting to know is if you're looking to align what you've now developed with some of the existing tools out there, just to see actually if they can provide some additional enrichment to what you've already got.
So if I understand the question correctly, is can we use this tool together with the others? Yeah, and there are a number of tools, good tools. We go in very specifically to the sort of the company issues. We go very specifically on the company issues. So there are different actions and maybe not the sort of the overall trust in the companies. I don't know if it's an answer, but there are a number of good tools for that.
It sort of answers my question. I mean, reputation is predicated on experience, but more importantly, what you say about yourselves as an organization and what people think about you. And this is why, for me, focusing on what is out there in the media and making sure you can draw that link into not just what your stakeholders are saying, but more importantly, what other people that are not your stakeholders are saying about you is key.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Daniel, I'm going to call it a day there. Thank you. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for bringing new thinking that we don't typically get at this summit. And please show your appreciation.
Thank you.